Alrighty, now that we're about 2 minutes after the hour, happy to kick this off. I have the pleasure of introducing all of you to Nick Cofield. He is the VP of Client Services with Jackson Thornton Technologies and will be speaking on untangling the tech stack. So without further ado, Nick, it is all yours.
Great. Thank you, Natalie. And thanks for inviting me to join you guys today. It was interesting when you reached out and suggested this topic of untangling the tech stack. It really resonated with me because I think in my position, in my role with an IT company, one of the things I always tell my clients that I work with is that we're oftentimes asked to play translator, right? We take a lot of technical jargon and we try to translate it into terms that the non-technical audience will understand. So we do a lot of untangling every day. So certainly I think this is an important thing to talk about. I've got an agenda for us here that's I guess I would call it a loose agenda. You'll notice as we get in the presentation that I might diverge a little bit, but I wanted to have a little structure for the conversation. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about today is, how to assess your current tech stack, how to assess what you have. And then not only that, identify opportunities for improvement. Where are areas within your information technology stack that there are areas for improvement, things that you can actually improve upon. We're also going to talk about how to evaluate new technologies, new vendors, and go through a proper due diligence process. How do we truly vet out a vendor or a new solution, new platform to make sure that it actually provides true value for the organization? We'll talk about prioritizing, making sure that we don't just go after the shiny new object. We want to make sure that we actually select technologies that will have those high value improvements. We'll take a few minutes to talk specifically about risk management and cybersecurity. This is something that is extremely important to me. It's a bit of a passion project for me. So I want to make sure we take time to think about how introducing new technologies affects your risk posture and your exposure under HIPAA. And then finally, we'll talk about implementation. If we're actually going to implement new technologies, what's some good best practices to follow as we actually start to roll those solutions out into our various organizations. So, why do we have this conversation? Why are we talking about untangling a tech stack? Well, I think everybody on this call would agree that every interaction we have, whether it's with the patients that we serve, whether it's with our staff that we work with every day, every interaction has some element of technology to it. So it's very important to understand what that technology looks like, what's working, what's not, so on and so forth. And poor technology choices, rolling out the wrong system, leveraging the wrong infrastructure, that can lead to frustration, delayed communication with patients, poor patient care, so on and so forth. So it's very critical that we select the right technologies. And as I mentioned earlier, with that comes compliance and security and making sure that we're not introducing a high level of risk as we roll out new technologies. And one of the things that I want to impress upon you guys is that, these technology decisions, they really are operational decisions. As we make decisions around new platforms, new systems, it really does affect our team and how their day-to-day operations might work within the organization. So we have to kind of look at this as organizational. It can't be siloed to just an IT conversation. It really has to involve everybody within the organization. I thought it might be good to sort of at a high level define, what is a tech stack? And, we in technology, we like to use these sort of generic terms. And I'm not trying to throw shade at Natalie or anybody with MGMA, but I'm guilty of it too. I use these terms. But when you hear the word tech stack, what does that mean? And really it is. It's your IT systems. It's what makes up technology within the practice. It could be clinical applications, those softwares and systems that help you provide patient care. It could be administrative applications, your practice management systems, your scheduling systems, all these technologies that are designed to create some efficiencies within the practice and enhance the experience your patients have when they come to receive care. Digging in a little further, though, of course, it's the software applications, it's the EMRs, it's the practice management systems, it's the patient engagement systems, but it's also that infrastructure that all those systems sit on top of, the servers, the networking, all those platforms that are facilitating your ability to use those applications. That's what we mean by a tech stack. It's all those things put together to provide you with information technology to hopefully provide a better experience for both patients as well as your staff. Now, when we talk about challenges, what can go wrong with a tech stack? What are some of the issues that we're often faced with? I'll give you three to kind of chew on. One, systems that don't integrate with one another. Another term we like to use in IT is data silos, right? And when I started at Jackson Thornton 20 years ago, and I first heard that term data silo, I couldn't help but think about those grain silos that you see out in the Midwest. And I would picture in my mind these data closets and these server rooms with these little silos that look like the grain silos, and that's where we're putting all the data. So, what we're really talking about here are just these repositories of information that we're throwing data into that simply can't talk to any other system, right? They're siloed, they're locked in, and that lack of integration, that lack of interoperability, it causes a lot of frustration. I've put patient information in a system over here, name information, demographic information, health information, but now I've got to turn over here and do the same thing with this other system because those two systems don't talk with one another. So what that leads to is, like I mentioned, employee frustration. It leads to the information being incorrect because I'm repeating myself, I'm getting lazy, I don't want to repeat the exact same information. And that poor information then leads to poor decision making because once it gets to, let's say, the electronic medical record system, the data is incomplete because it hasn't been able to go from that single source of truth, that original data entry, all the way down to the patient chart. So lack of integration is one big problem that we often see when we look at somebody's tech stack. Another problem we see is it's outdated, it's old. I love that picture of the abacus and the rotary phone. Not necessarily talking about using abacuses within our practices, but the idea is we oftentimes look at tech stacks and find that server infrastructure is aged, applications are no longer being supported. They don't allow us to leverage newer technologies. Hey, we can't introduce this new patient engagement platform because the system just simply isn't new enough or contemporary enough to allow for that type of functionality. And not only that, but also as systems age, the requirements to continue to support that system, to continue to maintain that system, increase. And so the cost to keep those systems running constantly increases as well. The cost to support and maintain those legacy systems continues to rise. And then the other thing that I think we should talk about when we talk about barriers is what we call vendor lock-in. And it's this idea that, hey, we've put all of our eggs in one basket. We've gone all in with a specific vendor or a specific type of technology. And that's worked great for a while. But now we want to introduce some new technologies, some new systems. We want to take a gamble on a new piece of software, but we can't because we're locked into this proprietary technology. This basket that we've put all of our eggs in simply does not allow us the flexibility to go out and integrate or embrace new technologies. And not only that, but the vendors in those situations, of course, they know they've kind of got you locked in. And so they'll simply use that as leverage. One example that I can think of right now that we're seeing is, many of you might be aware of a software known as VMware. It's server virtualization or system virtualization software. It was the go-to software for many, many years if you wanted to virtualize or take a large set of server systems and condense them down and reduce your physical footprint. Well, VMware, of course, was acquired by another larger company, and they knew they were the big player in town. And so what happened, customers and organizations that were using that software that had put all their eggs into the VMware basket for server virtualization, whereas previously their maintenance annual subscription cost may have been $1,500, $2,000. Now all of a sudden we're seeing $30,000 and $40,000 renewals. The vendor knew it was not easy to supplant that system, and they knew they could charge that because they were the only game in town. And we're slowly starting to see things change in that area, but it's a great example of that vendor lock-in that, hey, I've really invested in one particular type of technology, and now that's becoming an impediment to my ability to make changes and do new things because, again, we've gone all in. I want to take a second now and really focus in on infrastructure. It's a cliched analogy, but I think it's relevant here. With your tech stack, you're essentially building a house. And with any house, you've got a foundation, and the stronger the foundation, the better your ability it is to add things on top. And so your infrastructure is really your foundation. And a lot of the pain points that we see stem from outdated or disconnected infrastructure. Those lack of interoperabilities, those lack of integrations oftentimes can be traced to outdated or poor infrastructure. The legacy hardware that costs a lot to maintain and support ties right back to the infrastructure. And it's good for you to understand and know what your infrastructure looks like, because that point of reference is going to help drive conversations moving forward and drive decision-making processes around new technologies. And one of the things that I'll go ahead and say here is that developing an understanding of your infrastructure is a great byproduct of a thorough security risk analysis. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about cybersecurity, but I've always said one of the great byproducts of doing a thorough risk assessment is gaining that understanding and knowledge of what you have. What does our infrastructure look like? What do we maintain currently? As we talk about decisions, one of the biggest decisions that I find medical organizations have to make nowadays is, are we going to keep all of our infrastructure? Are we going to keep our tech stack here within the four walls of the practice? Or are we going to shift and allow another vendor, another solutions provider to host that information for us? The decision between cloud and on-premise is extremely important. And I thought it would be good to kind of dig into that decision, because the direction you go can oftentimes drive a lot of the other decisions that you have to make down the road. At a 30,000 foot level, cloud versus on-premise, when we talk about on-premise infrastructure, we're of course referring to the physical servers residing within your office, right? You can go into a room, you can lay hands, you can physically touch the equipment that houses your patient database, that houses your lab information, that houses your x-rays. You can see that equipment within your office. Versus the cloud, of course, someone is hosting that information for you in a facility that they maintain, that they operate, that they support, and you're simply connecting to that data center via an internet connection. Now, it's important to think through the pros and cons of each of these scenarios or each of these different deployment methodologies, because it can, again, really drive the way things move in the future. Now, I use the term pros and cons, but it's a bit subjective. One disadvantage to somebody could be an advantage to another. So keep that in mind. But starting with the on-premise scenario, of course, one of the great things about staying on-premise is the level of control that you have. If your servers sit in a server room and you manage it, you access it, you can do anything you want to. You can tweak it. You can have your own security protocols. If you've got database tunings that are unique to your organization, that is not a problem. You essentially maintain the ability to do whatever you want with that hardware. Now, of course, the responsibility to maintain, to support, to back up, to essentially keep that equipment up and going is also on you or your IT department or your IT provider. You have that responsibility. Not only do you carry that responsibility, but of course, with on-site hardware, there's a higher upfront cost, right? It's a capital expenditure, and it's the upfront cost in the hardware, those servers, that networking equipment, the software licenses, but it's also the cost of the logistics that you have to dedicate to actually housing that equipment. You've got to have a server room. I've got to have a network closet. I've got to have power, cooling, so on and so forth. And one exercise that I've gone through with clients as they try to debate whether to go to the cloud or stay on premise is think about that space. Let's say you have an 18 by 18 server room. You've got a couple of server racks in there. It's got power feeding those servers. It's got dedicated cooling. Now, what if we were to take that equipment and those resources and move them to the cloud and free up this room? What could you then do with that space? Could you create another exam room and increase your patient volume? Could you add an additional revenue generating service? There's an opportunity cost of dedicating physical space to IT equipment. So if we move that equipment, if we move that resource to the cloud, it frees up that space for other things. Now, conversely, if we look at the cloud scenario, one of the biggest advantages for me with the cloud is that it's really infinitely scalable. If you are in a significant growth mode and you are looking to multiply your user count or your number of applications significantly over the next 2 to 3 years, having resources in the cloud really makes that easy. You can expand that as much as you want. I think oftentimes, though, lost in that conversation is why you can scale up as much as you want, you can also scale down. So think about a scenario where a medical organization, let's say in the next couple of years, knows that they are going to be a target for private equity. Maybe they know within a couple of years a hospital is going to come and buy them out. Maybe they're looking at 4 to 5 providers retiring over the next 3 to 4 years. The idea that if I move systems to the cloud, I could very easily scale down as easily as I could scale up, to me, makes this pretty attractive. Because if I invest in hardware, if I invest in a big server infrastructure that's sitting in a room in my office, well, I can't go in there in 2 years and chop that server in half. I've got that whole box. Whereas in the cloud, again, I can move up or move down as necessary. Of course, from a cost standpoint, the cloud often brings lower capital costs, lower upfront costs, because the cost really is more of an operating expense, whether it's a subscription fee or what have you. You're paying every month for the use or allocation of resources in that environment. The biggest caveat and the biggest thing you kind of have to think of if you shift towards more of a cloud-centric model when it comes to your tech stack is, of course, you're completely dependent upon your ability to connect to that environment, to that data center, to that vendor who is hosting that information. So oftentimes, what I tell clients is kind of shift your mindset from disaster recovery, business continuity being data backups and our ability to restore systems using some hardware and software to we've got to make sure, regardless of what happens, we can connect into that environment. So I've got to have a fast internet pipe. I've got to have a big internet pipe, and I've got to have some redundancy in place. So if the city comes by to do construction and they cut my fiber internet, I have the ability to fail over to a secondary connection. That is not going to take me down. The business continuity conversation changes when you move to the cloud from data backups to the ability to connect. Now, I mentioned earlier that I wanted to make sure we talked about cybersecurity and risk management in this conversation, because for me, any conversation around IT and building out a tech stack in a medical practice has to include some element of cybersecurity. A data breach for you guys is significant. It's significant for anybody, but it's really, really significant within a medical organization. You guys experience data breach, you've got regulatory fines that you're facing. You've got the reputational hit. Nobody wants to be on Health and Human Services wall of shame to show that they had a data breach occur. You've got a lot of different elements that you have to address when you have a cyber attack. And of course, you guys know you've got a big target on your back, just like we do. You know, IT providers are a big target as well. Cyber criminals would love to get their hands on our systems because they know our systems touch a lot of other people's systems. Likewise, they'd love to get their hands on your systems because they know your patient data is extremely valuable on the dark web. And they also know that if they were to take you down, if they were to put you in a situation where you're essentially held ransom, then you're mission critical. You have to do something. And so they can actually charge you more for the restoration of that data because they know you've got to get back up and going to restore patient care. And the one thing that I want to impress upon you guys is that security, it's everybody's responsibility. And so just like we were talking about earlier, don't silo these conversations with IT. Make sure that as you're talking about new platforms, new technologies with everyone in the practice, whether it's admin, clinical, or what have you, make sure security is an element of that conversation. It doesn't just need to be a sort of side conversation that you have with a vendor. Some of the threats that you guys should probably know about, and you probably already know about these, but it's a good reminder. Of course, we just talked about it, ransomware, this idea that malicious software gets in your system, it encrypts your data, it locks it down so that you can't use it, and essentially the cyber criminal asks for payment to restore the information. The one thing that I always try to make sure I communicate to the medical practices that I work with is that ransomware can be really bad, but it can also lead to a HIPAA situation because theoretically in those situations, your patient data more than likely has been accessed in an unauthorized fashion. So it's not just the restoration of systems. It's not just getting back to where you can continue to see patients. It's also dealing with the impact of a HIPAA violation. Now, oftentimes, those ransomware attacks are the byproduct of a business email compromise or a phishing attack. Someone gets an email, they click on a link, they open an attachment, they provide their credentials, and that becomes the gateway to allow the cyber criminal in to launch the ransomware attack. Insider threats, you see that term insider threats, and you may automatically go to this idea of, all right, it's a movie and somebody kind of sits down at their desk and they've got this evil look on their face and they just can't wait to wreak havoc within the system. I'd challenge you to change your perspective a little bit when you hear the term insider threat. Think about the person on staff who refuses to do their cybersecurity training, thinks it's a waste of time. They're constantly failing their simulated phishing attacks. They're a clicker, as we like to call them. They love to click on anything and everything that comes into their mailbox. They're a problem child when it comes to information security. And then layer on top of that the fact that you've given them carte blanche access to really anything within the system. Hey, based on their job title, they've got to have access to all of our patient records. They got to have access to all of our communications platforms. That, to me, should be considered an insider threat, because you've got somebody who doesn't take information security seriously and who has access to anything and everything. So if they were compromised, the cyber criminal could leverage their access to really cause problems. So that's what I mean when I say insider threat. And then also going back to the idea of legacy systems, outdated hardware, unpatched systems that are sitting out there with known vulnerabilities and they're not being updated or patched. That can be a significant issue. I get emails every day from these watchdog organizations where vulnerabilities are being identified in widely known systems, Microsoft Exchange, Microsoft SharePoint, certain firewall vendors. And if you don't have somebody maintaining and updating those systems, that vulnerability is just sitting there waiting to be exploited. So I think those are just some things that you guys need to be aware of that certainly within your tech stack could lead to significant issues. Now, as you're evaluating changes, as you're evaluating adding to or enhancing your tech stack, some of the things that I think you should look for, the ability to encrypt data, whether you're asking a vendor to host data for you or whether you're actually looking to have that software on premise on your own servers, the ability to encrypt that data to protect it certainly helps prevent that data from being compromised, but also helps you from a HIPAA standpoint, because data encryption is something that is specifically referenced within the HIPAA security rule. The ability to audit activity, and not just the ability to know who logged into a system and the ability to track what they did, but is there ability to help me highlight suspicious logins, suspicious activity? In a lot of systems, audit logs can be hundreds of pages long. And so it can be very challenging to take a look at an audit log and really identify, well, what am I really supposed to be looking for here? So trying to find a system that not only provides good auditing, but also kind of helps you highlight those suspicious activities would be very helpful. Granular access controls. If I'm setting up users within a system, do I have the ability to get very granular with how much access I provide that user, down to the specific field within a window, for example? That can really help minimize the impact of that user's credentials being compromised. If they can't get very far in the system, then that cyber criminal can't get very far as well. Certainly anything on your tech stack that requires logins needs to have some element of multi-factor authentication. The last thing you want is for a username and password to be the one-way ticket into a system. So whether it's a vendor hosting your systems or bringing those systems on site, if we're logging into those applications, there needs to be another element of authentication beyond just simple username and password. And then finally, we just talked about unpatched systems being such a threat. Thinking about our ability to automate those patches, to automate those updates, to make sure that as significant vulnerabilities are identified, we're quickly, easily, and efficiently applying the patches to fix those vulnerabilities. Those are all things that I would want you to consider as you're thinking through creating a secure tech stack. And then the final thing on the cybersecurity side is I do want to point specifically to the HIPAA security rule, because I think it's good to understand exactly what is required of you under HIPAA. Of course, HIPAA security rule is made up of basically three tenets or three pieces of safeguards. You've got your administrative safeguards, which are your policies and procedures that really govern the use of the tech stack, of the information systems that contain patient information. Then you have your physical safeguards. Those are the access controls within the office itself, right? How do I secure the physical access to the building? How do I secure the location where I'm housing those servers, so on and so forth. And then we also have technical safeguards. How are we configuring the system to make sure we have access control in place to make sure that the data is being encrypted? So those are the three pillars of the HIPAA security rule as of today. Now, I did add a fourth column there. There are some proposed changes to the HIPAA security rule. The proposed changes were introduced late last year, went under review. Nothing has been finalized as of yet, but it should be on your radar that if these changes were to take place, and honestly, I hope some of these do pass, because the HIPAA security rule as it is really over 20 years old. Some of the language is completely outdated. Some of it is really hard to marry to and map to current technology. So just be aware that there are conversations and there are things taking place that could drive changes to your requirements under HIPAA. And if those do change, then of course that's going to apply or is going to impact how you build out your tech stack. Looking ahead, and I say this with the caveat that I'm certainly not an expert on artificial intelligence. I'm not a business intelligence guru, but I work enough with medical practices to kind of have an idea of some of the things that they're looking at. And so I wanted to kind of cast some vision around what we see as emerging technologies. Of course, any conversation around emerging technology has to begin nowadays with AI and automation. And the idea, of course, is that how can we leverage artificial intelligence to improve our clinical decision making, to create efficiencies? You know, these road exercises that we go through every day. Somebody has to spend 1 hour every day, 2 hours every day, inputting data, doing these routine tasks. How can we leverage AI to create an efficiency where that person is freed up those 1 to 2 hours to do something more meaningful, more impactful? So that's something I think we're going to continue to see more and more of. Patient engagement platforms. How are we truly engaging with our patients, and what can we do to make sure that that engagement aligns with the demographic that we serve, right? If our demographic is more youthful, if we serve a younger patient base, then maybe we lean really into mobile technology, right? Young people really don't like talking on the phone, right? So what can we do to make sure that we're doing text-based stuff, that we're doing online-based stuff, that we're really giving them the information and giving them the platforms that they're comfortable with? Now, conversely, if you work with an older demographic, an older population, you think about, and I've seen it, you walk into a waiting room and there's 2 kiosks there, and they get confused. They don't really know how to use it. They end up asking your staff to help them. So how can we make sure that our engagement with an older population is better, that we're not asking them to use tools that they don't understand? So I think patient engagement is going to be something that we really see a lot of, just again, to make sure that we're serving our population base and our patient base appropriately. And then also virtual care. This idea that, hey, I'm providing care in an underserved area, and I don't want the 1 to 1.5 to 2 hour travel distance to be an impediment on my ability to provide my patients with the best amount of care. So what can I do to take the technologies and the systems and the ability for me to provide that patient care out of these 4 walls and follow the patient home and not have any degradation in care, right? That I can provide the same level of care while they're at their house, and again, not have there be a challenge of them getting in the car and driving 1 or 2 hours. So I think those are some things we need to be aware of in terms of emerging technologies. Now, whether it's one of those 3 or something else, I think there are some basic questions that need to be asked in to roll out new technologies or new applications. The first thing would be, does this actually solve a problem? Do we have an acute situation where if we invest in a new technology or a new platform, that it's going to solve that problem? We don't want to just adopt technology because it's trendy. We don't want to adopt technology because the practice down the street is using it and we don't want to be left behind. We don't want to spend a lot of money on a piece of software just because our friend who we talked to at the last medical conference did the same at their practice. We want to make sure that we're addressing a specific issue with any addition to our tech stack. something else you want to ask is that, is this application, is this platform, is this solution, is it easy to use? Now, if I gave this to my administrative staff, if I gave this to my clinical staff, are they going to be very easily bought in to the idea? Are they going to look at it and say, this is very intuitive, I love this? Or are they going to look at it and say, gosh, I'm looking at 10 new screens now, and this looks nothing like any of our other systems, and I'm really going to start to push back because I don't understand why we're doing this. What's your return? If you're spending $100,000 on a new system that's going to reduce your no-shows by 2%, is it really worth it, right? So, what is the return on the investment? And not just in money, but in time. We're going to spend 6 months rolling out this system and only have a minuscule amount of improvement. It may not be worth it. And then going back to what we were talking earlier with challenges, does this system integrate and is it compatible with our existing systems? Are we going to be able to take data that we already maintain and push it into the new system and have it push back so that we can have constant data flow? Or are we going to be slaves to sitting down and typing the same information that we already have in our systems because this new application does not integrate? Going through a due diligence process can be a little challenging. And certainly there's probably a lot more than I have on this page that makes up a good vetting process. But I thought it'd be good to kind of just talk through some questions that I would want to ask any vendor that I might be inviting into my tech stack. Certainly, I want to find out, where is my data? Where is it stored? Is it going to be on premise on a server that I maintain? Is it going to be in a private cloud situation? Is it going to be in a data center that you, Mr. Vendor, maintain, own, operate, et cetera, et cetera? Is it going to be in a public cloud like a Microsoft or a Google? Where's the data going to actually sit? And if you're hosting the information and the data for me, Mr. Vendor, are you aware of my responsibilities under HIPAA, which of course makes you responsible under HIPAA as well, making sure that they understand the regulatory environment that you live within? As you're looking at contracts, as you're looking at agreements, you want to make sure that there is an SLA clearly defined, a service level agreement that guarantees a certain level of system availability. And you want to have 99 point and then as many nines as possible. And you want to ask the vendors, have you experienced significant outages? What is the most time you've had down as a system over the past 6, 12, 18 months? And you want to understand what layers of redundancy they have in place to minimize that downtime. If your data center were to be affected by, let's say, a cyber attack, do you have a secondary data center ready to essentially get turned on at any time that will minimize the downtime on my side? How is access managed? Are we going to be able to leverage those granular access controls to really dig down deep and limit the amount of access we're providing to our users? Are we going to be able to turn on multi-factor authentication? I've been frankly surprised at the number of vendors that I've talked to lately that really don't have a good native way to support multi-factor authentication, and of course auditing as well, having the ability to look at those audit logs. How often are the systems updated and patched? Who's responsible for that updating and patching? And then finally, what happens if we leave? What's our exit strategy? Let's say that we go with your application, we become a customer of yours, and let's say in 2 years, we decide we want to do something different. Who owns the data? Are you going to provide me with a data export? Are you going to give me only a certain amount of the data? I'll never forget a lesson that we learned here at Jackson Thornton many years ago. We were helping a client that actually was wanting to change their human resources and payroll system from one vendor to another. And we were providing some advisory services. And one of the things they asked us to do is help them with the export of the data out of their current system. And so we just made that simple request. Hey, Mr. Vendor, we would like for you to export the information that our customer or our client owns, because we're going to want to take that data and import it into the new system. And we showed up at the office one day to find 20 boxes of paper that the vendor had essentially taken the data and printed out for us. And they felt that they fulfilled their obligation to provide the data. So you definitely don't want to get a situation where you're walking in one day to all your data being printed out on 8.5 by 11 paper. You want to make sure you understand exactly what that portability looks like and what is your ability to get that data in a format that's usable for integration and input into a new system. I used this term earlier, and I'm going to go back to it. You always want to avoid shiny object syndrome. And I can tell you that At Jackson Thornton, I am the world's worst at being a victim of shiny object syndrome. As a technology provider, we're constantly evaluating new systems, new solutions. We want to make sure we're providing the latest and greatest to our clients. And I guarantee you, my colleagues would tell you, we get on a presentation from a vendor and they do the dog and pony show. And my instant reaction is, where do I sign? This sounds great. Let's go. Thankfully, we've got some people here a little more pragmatic who kind of pull me back a little bit. But a lot of us are guilty of that. We see the great things this system can do. We see all the bells and whistles, and we immediately want to move forward. And so we gotta have to take a step back. We have to focus on the operational impact. Again, is this system going to truly impact our operations in a positive way? Is it going to solve real issues, or is it, again, just the shiny object that looks great but isn't really doing anything functional? We don't want to chase trends. AI is trendy right now. Everybody's talking about AI, but how are we really going to leverage it, right? We don't want to just do AI for AI's sake. AI carries its own level of risk. So we want to make sure we're smart and we're not just chasing the shiny new car. And also, we want to make sure that we're engaging with all of our team to make sure that this is relevant, right? That, okay, we're having these demonstrations, we're having these presentations, but we're not really thinking about how this might impact another department or another group that we really haven't any solicited their feedback from. So you want to make sure that you're getting everyone's feedback, and what sounds great to one group may be the world's worst thing ever to another group. And we want to make sure that we take that into consideration. As you start going through a due diligence process, and I mentioned this earlier when we talked about knowing what your infrastructure looks like, you really do need to create a point of reference. You really do need to create some sense of, okay, here's what I have. List out your current systems. What applications do we have, clinical and administrative? What infrastructure do we carry? What are those ancillary components, the billing services, the patient portals? What are those things that kind of tie in to our IT systems? You want to make sure you know exactly what you have, because again, it can be a good point of reference as you're determining what to add and what needs to be included. Assess all the functionality. Where are things working well, and where are we having problems? Where are those gaps that there are opportunities for improvement? And the things you want to look at, again, duplication of effort. Where do we have some staff members doing the exact same thing as somebody else just because they're having to enter that data twice? What are the manual workarounds that we're having to do? And if you ever hear something like, well, we do it that way because we've always done it that way. Okay, well, what can we do to fix that? And document your integration points. If systems are talking to one another, document that, because you want to make sure you keep that in consideration moving forward. Spot your gaps and set your priorities. You want to make sure that you understand where those gaps are. You want to make sure you understand where there are opportunities for improvement. And like I said earlier, you want to get that feedback from all parties, right? So you don't want to have a conversation with practice management and IT and make a decision around the IT solution without really considering the impact on all areas, clinical, admin, what have you. And prioritize the upgrades that improve care, that improve your staff experience, and that maybe even enhance your compliance as well. That could be an offshoot of one of these additions. And one of the things that I put together that I would suggest could be helpful is this impact versus ease matrix. And so this is a very generic example, but the idea is, okay, we create a chart or we create a graph where on one axis we have the operational impact. How is this actually going to impact our ability to see patients, to provide patient care, to maintain a good staff? What's the operational impact? And then conversely, how easy is it to implement? How easy can we roll this out? And what you're looking for that low-hanging fruit, right? You're looking for those quick wins. In this scenario, for this particular practice, those quick wins, very easy to implement, very high operational impact, automated appointment reminders, secure patient messaging, role-based access controls. Those are three things that this particular practice or this particular organization identified as quick wins. And what would typically happen is they would move forward with those. Now, conversely, if you look at the bottom left quadrant, those are the time-intensive projects that may not really have that much impact. In this situation, the example, building a custom analytics engine. It's not going to be very easy to implement. We've got a lot of data. We're going to have to build this engine from scratch. And the impact at the end of the day, it's just not that great. So, something like this can really kind of help you identify not just where your opportunities are, but where are the quick victories we can have? Where are the things that we can do to really enhance our tech stack? And again, maybe not have it overhaul or cause a lot of frustration with staff. All right, so shifting a little bit ahead, implementing, right? Actually rolling out, deploying technologies and introducing things into your tech stack in production. I'm a big fan of pilot programs. I don't have any issues going to a client and saying, hey, we need to find a guinea pig, right? We need somebody to test this for us. We need somebody who is willing to take the good with the bad and somebody who can give us feedback on whether or not this needs to be rolled out to everyone. So start with a pilot, start small, test, get that feedback, and use that exercise to tweak, change, do whatever you need to do to make sure as you continue to roll out, you're addressing the known issues, the known challenges. Get everybody involved. Once again, it starts with a pilot. Now maybe we roll it out to 5 or 6 champion groups who are going to provide us with more comprehensive feedback. And that also helps to develop that buy-in, because one of the challenges we see when we introduce new technology is that you want to make sure everybody's bought into the idea, the concept that, hey, there's going to be a little pain as we learn this new system, but at the end of the day, it's going to be worth it. So you want to have your cheerleaders and your champions. And a big thing here is whenever you introduce a new system, whenever you're trying to roll out new technology, you want to make sure you really spend a lot of time on training, hands-on training. I've seen too many situations where a solution, a technology is purchased, and the training is on-demand videos. Oh, hey, we'll do 1 hour via a webinar like this with your staff. That's not enough. You can't expect somebody to learn an all-new system by watching a 20-minute online video. So you want to make sure that as part of your investment in new technologies, that you're getting that hands-on training. You make sure that training is specific to individual roles, right? The clinical area will need unique training, different from admin and billing. And I put this in there because it's something we like to do. Once a system's implemented, once a system's out there and in production, I love to give tip sheets. Hey, if you see this, here's what you do, bullet points, things like that. Have something that's a quick reference for your staff to say, hey, I know we talked about this in training, but I forget what the guy said. Oh, wait, let me go to my tip sheet. This will tell me. I think that's just a great little tool that you can use, and most vendors will help you with that. These are 2 sort of generic scenarios, but I thought it would be good to kind of walk through because I think they help illustrate some of the things that we talked about. I'm going to start actually on the right side. This is a small medical practice that's decided to adopt a new scheduling system. And they've decided to do this without talking to the staff, without talking to IT. Imagine a scenario where you go to an MGMA conference, you talk to a vendor, you sign a contract at the conference, and you start implementing 2 weeks after you get back. So in this scenario, the system that was purchased didn't have integration capabilities. So now you've got manual data entry taking place because the data in system A can't in system B. The price was great, but the price was great because it didn't include any training. So our staff doesn't know how to use it. They're surprised, first of all, that we're introducing it at all. Now they don't know how to use it. They're frustrated. They're confused. They've got this new scheduling system. They don't know how to use it. It leads to missed appointments with patients. The price was cheap because vendor support is not great, and the vendor's hosting the system for us, and they don't have the right protocols in place to maintain a hosted environment, so it's frequently down. What happens is that after 6 months, we just abandon it. This is not going to work. Whereas on the left side, we've got a multi-specialty clinic who decided to implement a cloud-based patient engagement system. In this scenario, they created the pilot group. Hey, we're going to have a small group of users use this. We want you to solicit feedback from the patients who use the new platform. We want to get the good, the bad, and the ugly. The system was chosen because it seamlessly integrates with their EHR, the Athena, the Greenway, what have you. Staff was trained well, and they did a phased rollout to make sure that they were learning and making changes as they continued to deploy it. And the result in that scenario was the patients loved it. They felt like they were engaging with their provider at a higher level. And the appointment adherence went up significantly because they wanted to actually make their appointment. They wanted to come see the physician practice. So again, 2 very generic rudimentary scenarios, but I thought they might illustrate some of the things that we previously discussed. Now, you get the application, the software introduced, you deploy it. How do you know whether it was worth it or not, right? How do you measure whether or not this was a successful exercise? Well, Another one of those terms that we love in IT, KPIs, your key performance indicators. You want to have some metric to measure to say, hey, yeah, this was worth it, right? Did our no shows reduce by 20%? Is our billing cycle now much more efficient? Has our patient satisfaction scores gone from an 89 to a 96, right? There needs to be some metric. And I would encourage you, use quantitative and qualitative data, right? Have the numbers, and numbers are always truthful, right? There's no gray area in numbers, but talk to people as well. Hey, the numbers are showing that this system is working great, but let me get Mr. Staff Member your experience. What do you think? Take that information into consideration as well. Get your patient's feedback as well. As for feedback, one of the things I would encourage you to do is, as you roll out new systems, use surveys, whether that's internally or externally. Hey, we noticed you used our new patient engagement platform. We'd like to send you a survey, just a few quick questions to get your feedback on how you like using it. What did you like? What did you not like? Et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of free platforms out there like SurveyMonkey that you can use to solicit that information. And be flexible. After you've gone through the exercise of deployment and after you've collected all this feedback, maybe you need to make some changes. Maybe you need to invite the vendor back to do some additional training. Maybe that was the one piece of feedback you got from staff was, we like this, but we just didn't get enough training. Okay, well, let's see what we can do to get them back to do some follow-up training. Maybe we need to tweak some of the settings. Maybe the system's running too slow, so we need to address the infrastructure that we put that system on to make sure that performance is where it is. It's kind of a continual thing that you've got to keep working on and tweaking to make sure that it's doing exactly what it's intended to do. So just to wrap up, it's important to ask the right questions. And as you're working with vendors and you're working with providers who are going to introduce technologies to your stack, I would encourage you to focus on how it integrates with your current stack. How does it provide for scalability? And that might take you back to that conversation of cloud versus on-premise. And make sure you're looking at vendors who are transparent, right? Anytime a vendor is a bit hesitant to, let's say, for example, provide you with information security information, for me, that would be a red flag. Prioritize security and compliance. Make sure that any conversation you're having about new additions to your stack involve or include something about information security and HIPAA compliance. And I would also advise, if it's been a while since you went back and looked at your existing vendor relationships, your existing solution providers that have kind of built your existing stack, well, take another look. Make sure your BAAs are in place. Make sure that you don't have a vulnerability sitting there waiting to be exploited. Have a roadmap, cast some vision, make sure that you're aligned with what staff expects, with what you're really trying to do as an organization strategically. Engage the team, make sure that these conversations, again, aren't siloed to certain departments. You don't want to just have a conversation with IT about a new system that's going to affect everybody. You want to get everyone's feedback, and then have some measurement, right? Whether you're using KPIs, whether you're collecting feedback, you want to have some type of measurement that you can look at and say, yes, this was absolutely worth it, or you know what, we achieved what we wanted to, but are there opportunities to go back in and make some changes to get to where we wanted to get to actually reach our goals? So that's all of the presentation. And I think we're going to move to a Q&A session. So if anybody has questions, whether it's about what we discussed or anything else tech stack related, I think we'll move into Q&A.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was wonderful. We do already have one question, but before I read it out, just want to encourage anyone else that has questions or want a little bit more information, please feel free to put your questions directly into the chat, or we also have that Q&A feature. But this very first one is, when evaluating some new tech, what criteria do you think should be prioritized in order to avoid disruption to both the clinical and the administrative workflows?
So, going back to some of the things we talked about, I would focus on, how does the new tech integrate with our current system, right? Is it going to kind of sit out there by itself and be one of those data silos that we talked about? Or are we going to be able to take that solution, that system, and bring it into our existing tech stack and kind of seamlessly integrate that information? How usable is the system? One of the things that I always want to talk about when I'm vetting out new vendors is, okay, I'm going to hand this over to a group of guys who are pretty smart, but sometimes they still get challenged with new technology. So if I put this technology, if I put this solution in front of somebody in my billing office, are they going to take to it? Or again, are they going to say, look, this is just too difficult, I'm not going to use it? And then it becomes a wasted exercise. And then the other thing that I would ask about is, okay, everything sounds great now. We buy your system, we buy your solution. What does support look like? What if I have an issue 2 months, 3 months down the road? Who do I call? Do I have somebody dedicated to me? Where's your support staff located? Those are just some of the questions I would probably focus in on at the beginning.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have one more question, but again, just want to encourage anyone in the chat, if you have anything in particular you want to ask, please feel free to add it. How should business leaders and owners approach the conversation with vendors about cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance, since I know that can be a touchy subject sometimes?
Yeah, I think I would start with some of the basic questions like we talked about: data encryption, access control. What are the mechanisms within the system that are going to allow me to ensure I can attest to HIPAA compliance, right? So the first thing I would think about is functionality within the system relevant to cybersecurity. Then taking it a little bit deeper, I would start to press the vendor on their information security policy. If they're going to host information for me, I want to see something like a SOC 2 Type 2 audit report. I want to make sure that they understand their responsibility for securing the data that I'm going to give them, and make sure that they have all their safeguards in place, just like I'm expected to as a covered entity under HIPAA.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And then one super final question: is there, in your expertise, any early signs that practice and practice owners should keep in mind that their tech stack might be holding back their full operational efficiency?
Yeah, I think, you work inside your practice every day. You know where people get frustrated. If you notice that people are having to repeat themselves, put information in over here and then turn around and do the same thing over there. If you see a bunch of people carrying around stacks of paper and you're like, why do you have that stack of paper? We have automated systems. Well, the system won't work with this information. I have to do this. I have to scan this information in on the scanner. It's identifying those, number one, frustrations from staff. Those are red flags, but also identifying those routines that have become routines just because the system doesn't allow us to create the automation, right? People are doing it that way because they've always done it that way and they don't know that there's any way better. Those are the things that I would look for to try and create the opportunities for improvement in technology.
Definitely. Those small things make a big difference for sure.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, unless anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Nick. This was
No, thank
wonderful.
you.
Well, I
Yeah,
will let
absolutely. Thank you for the
everyone.
invitation.
Absolutely. Everyone that's joining the call, keep an eye out on your emails for a follow-up with the survey and if you need to get a certificate for this. Otherwise, I will just say thank you again, Nick. It was an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye.